Hello. Hello. Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Should I start?
Yeah, we are now live on YouTube. Yes.
Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Today's book review is by
Hello. Am I
our
audible?
youngest. Hello.
Yes, yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes. Didi, you can continue. You are frozen.
Hello.
Now you're audible.
Audible? Yeah. Good evening, everyone. Today's book review is by our youngest and most hardworking member of the group, Joy. Joy is the founder of Book Talkies, and he is currently studying in class 10. He is one of the youngest speakers of TED Talks, and Joy has won and come first at IIT Bhubaneswar competition in past and is being awarded. And he stood sixth in all over globe in Conrad Challenge held at premier universities in US graduation. Joy is a holder of 4 patents and has won n number of prizes in IITs all over India. And in recent, he is working with a US professor and has been collaborated and has presented project papers, and presented papers at such a tender age. Today's book review is on the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin. He is one of the four founders of United States and a renowned scientist and physicist. And we all very well know him for the discovery of uh, electricity and inventions such as bifocals, which is so important in our day-to-day lives. And now I would like to give headshot to Joy. Joy, you may start with the review.
Thank you for the introduction. So, this is a very short book, and since this is an autobiography, this is in short a story. So, this won't be a very long review like our typical reviews because I'll only be narrating the story of his life, how he went on to the place where he is today, and what were the hurdles and what were the little things, how he learned uh, during this journey. So, why did I choose this book? So, Benjamin Franklin is a little bit lesser known in India, but is a very big personality in US. And this book, this autobiography, is one of the most influential autobiographies ever written. So, but this book is unfinished. I mean, he had written it in a lot of volumes, and this is still yet to be completed. So, I'll just start. Benjamin Franklin's autobiography remains one of the most influential ones ever. His famous quote, either write something worth reading or do something worth writing, aptly describes himself and his personality, his thought process, everything. So he is known as the first American of the United States. He is a founding father and the member of the Committee of the Five that drafted the Declaration of Independence. He appears on the $100 US bill, which is currently the highest denomination in existence. He's a writer, a printer, politician, scientist, and inventor. This great man was born in Boston, Massachusetts, to his father, Josiah Franklin, in a very huge family of 17 children. And he was the youngest son and the youngest child, but two. So, as he describes, he always has had the attributes of a true leader. He traces back his ancestry to England. So, according to a memoir left by his uncle, he traces back his whole family with the death certificates and the marriage certificates to Acton in England. He mentions that from the last 5 generations on, he has always been the youngest son in the family. Um, he mentions that he mentions that he was educated till 10, only 10, because of financial studies, financial limitations. So he learned Latin in school, and was so interested in language and literature that he self-taught himself 5 different foreign languages. He was a poet and an avid reader, a very avid reader. He a great writer from always. He was always a great writer and polished himself more in this art by a very interesting trick that I found very useful. So he what he did was he wrote an article on a subject which was important to it was an important chapter in the history of mankind, and then he compared his articles with the articles written by other famous people, or mm, articles in newspapers or books. And then he compared both of those and rewrote his article. And that's how he improved himself, his writing, to the day that he was chosen as one of the people to write the Declaration of Independence for the United States. So, moving back, so he had unlimited access to newspapers, books, and everything, because when he was 12 years old, he worked as an apprentice under his brother at a printing press. So that's very mindful that he'll have a lot of access. So when Benjamin was 15 years old, his brother started the New England Courant, which was the first truly independent newspaper during that time in colonies. So Benjamin always had that flair of writing and how he improved himself, as I mentioned. So he wanted to write articles for the newspaper, but his brother didn't want him to grow a lot, so he denied to publish Benjamin's articles and letters and writings. But Benjamin was a little struck by this, so he assumed a pseudonym for himself, Silence Dogood, and he wrote under that pen name, and he sent those letters to the publisher, that is his brother, and all of them were published. And it is known that during that time, these particular letters were the talk of the town. But Benjamin once wrote something that offended the governor in name of Silence Dogood. She was a supposedly a middle-aged woman. So his brother was imprisoned because of the offensive statements written. And at that time, freedom of speech was not there because of the colonial rule. So Benjamin actively wrote articles in order to free his brother by writing articles on freedom of speech. But after he was released, he somehow his brother knew that Benjamin was Silence Dogood. And due to all of the things that happened, Benjamin thought it was wise to leave the apprenticeship, and he fled to Philadelphia in Philadelphia. So when he was 17 in Philadelphia, he walked on and around many printing houses. I mean, that was his passion because he wanted different texts to read. So that's why he wanted to work in a printing house. But he couldn't find himself a fit where he could, sustain and even grow. He grew closer to Sir William Keith, who was then the governor of Philadelphia. He grew friendlier and closer to him, he so they got close, and William, that is Sir William Keith, asked Benjamin to go to sorry, yeah, to go to London and buy some some material, some equipment, which then he could, set up a printing press in Philadelphia. So while on the journey, he befriended Mr. Denham. And when he reached London, he was taken aback because there was no letter in his name from Sir William Keith. And so he was now stuck all alone in England, in London, without money, without any friend. So he turned to Mr. Denham for help. Mr. Denham told of the true, real identity or the true colors of Sir William Keith, that he couldn't help people till the end. So he asked that Benjamin work in London for some time, learn from the different printing presses in London, in England. And when Mr. Denham would go back to States, then he will take Benjamin along with him back to the United States. So he then worked on and around in London in, again, printing presses. So after 18 long months, he returns to the United States, and there are a lot of changes when he comes back to Philadelphia. First of all, Sir Keith is no longer the governor because he was superseded by Major Gordon, and uh, his love, Miss Reed, was now married to someone else known as Rogers, who was a porter in Ben's absence. But due to some differences, they parted their ways. So Benjamin continued working with his life and all, and he was offered a job by Mr. Denham. So he worked as he sold goods at Mr. Denham's shops, and but both were soon ill due to some disease, and Mr. Denham succumbed to that, leaving Benjamin a small token of love in his will. Now Benjamin returned to working into printing presses, and the earlier one, which was under Keimer, and he worked under Keimer. He turned the whole place around, but Keimer was already under a lot of debt, and he couldn't afford Benjamin, because he had to give him a lot of salary, so a lot more salary, because he had more experience. So he fired Benjamin, and then Benjamin left. As he left the job, he was approached by Hugh Meredith, and Hugh Meredith offered Benjamin a partnership where he would uh, where Hugh Meredith would give the stock, that is the money and the materials, and Benjamin would do the labor in the shop, in the printing press. So, and the profits will be shared equally. Later on, Benjamin Franklin went on to become a very successful individual, and a very wealthy one. He also started his own newspaper after, some successful years of this thing, of this. And he also married Miss Reed after he became successful. And then Benjamin was not very content with things because he wanted a little bit more of, involvement in public, this thing. So he therefore formed a group by the name Junto. So it was a public affairs think tank. They discussed different things of policies in Philadelphia, and morality and philosophy and other things like that. So it was restricted to only 12 members, and then all of them were very interested in reading books. So they decided to open a library, which was just for the 12 members of the group. But then they decided that they had so many books in collection that why not go public about this library. So they established it under the name Library Company of Philadelphia. And just so that you know, this library today is a very famous, huge scholarly library in Philadelphia. So he then started his newspaper company, which also went on to become very successful, which went by the name Pennsylvania Gazette. And there was a setback to Franklin's public identity. He publicly acknowledged that he had a son who was illegitimate as he was born out of the wedlock. So he didn't reveal the name of mother, but this actually impacted his public life, and also his relation with his wife. But he raised him under his household itself. So Benjamin Franklin was always very, what do you say, fond of anonymity. He was an author also, not before he wrote this autobiography, but he wrote a book by the name Poor Richard's Almanac under a pen name, Saunders. It was a very successful book, but most of the people already knew that it was him who was Richard Saunders. But he always, I mean, look at his modesty, he always acknowledged that he was not Richard Saunders. Now, we don't know the exact reason so as to why he didn't acknowledge that he was Richard Saunders, but he didn't. So Benjamin Franklin was always a scholar who was exploring new things. So because as they say, education is the most powerful weapon you can use to change the world, in the words of Nelson Mandela. So he became interested in science, and he became a scientist as well, as Vaishnavi Didi introduced in the book. And he became a very acclaimed scientist because you must have heard of the very, very, very famous experiment, Franklin's kite experiment. So he performed the kite experiment to prove that in the clouds, the lightning which occurs is actually flow of electrons. Electricity is flowing. So he proved that using by collecting the charges using a kite, by flying a kite. And he took all his precautions. I mean, he stood on a um, insulator so as to avoid him getting shocked. And he had a huge modesty. He published this in his newspaper, but he didn't publish his name. That is, like, he did the experiment, he didn't publish that. He conducted many other experiments and studies to prove out different scientific concepts, and also did research in sociology and oceanic studies. So this brilliant mind didn't know that his political career had already begun when he led those kids in Boston, those boys in Boston's, as a child, to writing the articles, the influential articles that he wrote. He was always at the forefront in politics, a forerunner, I would say. But he never knew that he would die as one of the most influential people in the United States. His public service life, as rightly guessed, is very decorated. He started the Union Fire Company, which was one of the first volunteer firefighting companies. He was also known as a great inventor, as he produced anti-counterfeiting currency for New Jersey. He started a lot of educational institutes, initiatives in Philadelphia. And actually, this is marked as the true entry of his into public service. His first public post was that of a councilman. Later, he went on to become the Justice of the Peace in 1751. He was elected into Pennsylvania Assembly. He started the Pennsylvania Hospital, which became the first hospital in the United States of America. I mean, there were hospitals, but they were under British America. And then his the hospital that he opened was the first one under the United States. He was appointed the deputy postmaster general of British America. So once he was successful enough, he went to London for 2 decades, where he seriously pursued his scientific ambition. He was also sent to England by the Pennsylvania Assembly as a colonial agent during those 2 decades only. I mean, he was already in London, but he was recognized and he was given a duty as a colonial agent by the Pennsylvania Assembly as well. So he voiced against the bill that forced Americans to pay a share in the French and Indian War. As a spokesperson, he spoke against it in the assembly and wrote some of the most influential essays of all time. So this autobiography was written in many volumes by Benjamin Franklin, but this is unfinished because some were not found. But there are some more important milestones of his life, which I will cover, but they are not through this autobiography, but through external sources. So he was appointed the member of the Committee of Five who drafted the Declaration of Independence. He was one of the signatories of the Declaration of Independence, hence is known as the founding father and the first American. One thing he's especially proud of was being the postmaster of Pennsylvania. He was then the ambassador to France and Sweden, after which he came back stateside and became the president of his home state, Pennsylvania. So now this is a bit of this thing, but I will end with a poem of his. I mean, as you must know, as I told that he was a very acclaimed poet. So I'll end with a poem of his. Death is a fisherman. The world we see, his fish pond is, and we the fishes be. His net, some general sickness. However, he is not so kind as the other fishes be. For if they take one of the smaller fry, they throw him in again, he shall not die. But death is sure to kill all he can get, and all is fish with him that comes to net. This great man who once walked the same earth now roams the heavens for his good deeds. He did. It is this man who is known as the president of the United States who never became the president of the United States. Thank you.